We know in Australia, Aboriginal people, on average, are not faring so well, both from a health perspective and a socio-economic one. For example, The Guardian reported in March, rate of Indigenous people in jail has risen by 20% since 2019. Similarly, the National Indigenous Times reported, no longer surprising, NT closing the gap targets going backwards. According to the latest data in the Northern Territory, life expectancy for First Nations women has gone backwards, as well as targets around employment, birth weight, early childhood education, child development, and youth engagement. Earlier this year, in a brief moment of truth-telling, Tasmanian Aboriginal activist and lawyer Michael Mansell commented on the large amounts of government funding being thrown at this, with the National Indigenous Times reporting, Tasmanian Aboriginal leader says throwing millions at Indigenous disadvantage has achieved nothing. I think objectively we can all agree on that. The Australian government continues to throw billions of dollars at this issue, and what do they have to show? Increased incarceration rates. The only industry that benefits from that is the prison industry. The National Indigenous Times reported, Australia spending $6.8 billion a year on prisons as Indigenous incarceration continues to rise. But why is this happening? I don't claim to have the answers, but one thing that is often blamed, at least in part, is alcohol. Last year, SBS reported, governments must halt the rivers of grog to help prevent violence against women. Basically, alcohol is seen as cheap and dangerous, and in order to prevent social harm, we need to control the availability of alcohol, at least in some Aboriginal communities. Earlier this year, the National Indigenous Times reported, experts call for NT alcohol harm reduction measures to be retained. Basically, there was a minimum floor price in place for alcohol in the Northern Territory, with the article stating, removing the floor price will spell disaster and is likely to lead to more harm, more crime, and more disadvantage. Essentially, they're implying that Aboriginal people, or at least some Aboriginal people, lack the personal responsibility required to control their drinking behaviour. Alcohol is such a bane on Aboriginal society that it needs to be restricted. But I'd just like to push back on that argument a little bit, noting that I'm not implying that alcohol hasn't been abused in these communities. I think it certainly has. But I'd just like to make an observation based on my lived experience. That term seems to be all the rage nowadays, doesn't it? SBS even used it in that article I showed you before about the rivers of grog. I used to live and work in Japan for a number of years. One thing that is undeniable about Japanese culture is their love affair with alcohol. Alcohol is deeply intertwined with social and business life. I worked for a school, and it was expected that all staff members attend these so-called nomikai. Essentially, a drinking party held at a Japanese pub as a sort of platform for informal interaction and strengthening bonds between colleagues. I didn't particularly like them, mainly because I'm socially awkward. I'm naturally introverted, so the last thing I want to do is hang out with a whole bunch of people chit-chatting in a different language. But I did it because I guess I had a desire to fit in. When in Rome, do as the Romans do, right? It should be noted that it is considered completely acceptable to become drunk at a nomikai. I saw many colleagues become so inebriated that they needed to be carried to a taxi or the train. But all was forgotten the next day. Individuals that I saw passed out on the floor still managed to pick themselves up, dust themselves off, and attend work on time the next day. Sure, they were clearly hungover, but being drunk was never used as an excuse to be late or to miss a deadline. Actually, it was unacceptable to use that as an excuse. It should also be noted that in Japan, alcohol is cheap and plentiful, a lot cheaper than Australia. You can buy cans of alcohol in vending machines or at convenience stores, which are virtually everywhere and open 24/7. In this picture, a can of beer is 130 yen, so like $1.39 Australian. This is from last year, but in a convenience store or supermarket, you can pick up a can of Strong Zero, 9% alcohol, for like $1.20 or whatever. For the same product in Australia, at least on the Dan Murphy's website, it's about $120 for a case of 12, so like $10 a can. What's my point here? Well, despite their drinking culture, despite alcohol being cheap and plentiful, the Japanese are an extremely industrious bunch. They obviously have some of the world's best car manufacturers. They're known for their electronics, robotics, and technological advancements. Just last week, the ABC reported that the Japanese Navy are sailing around the Pacific in their state-of-the-art Mogami-class stealth frigate, selling defense contracts to the highest bidder. Whatever I just said about Japan pretty much applies to China as well. I've lived and worked in China, my wife is Chinese, and they certainly have a deeply rooted drinking culture as well, which is deeply intertwined with social and business relationships, often involving toasts and rituals. I saw many a businessman drink too much and have to be carried home. And yet, China is famous for their manufacturing industries, including electronics, textiles, and steel production. They're also leading global production in electric vehicles and renewable energy. They're the ones pumping out most of our solar panels and wind turbines. My point is, the Japanese and Chinese love to drink. It's integral to their culture. But it is never used as an excuse to be lazy or to not contribute to society. Their societies do not accept that. Despite their proclivity towards alcohol, the Japanese are building cars, robots, and giant warships and sailing them around the world, while the Chinese are building electric cars and solar panels. So what's gone wrong in Aboriginal society? Yes, alcohol has certainly impacted many of their communities. I'm not denying that. But whereas the Chinese and Japanese have a strong sense of personal responsibility, the focus on alcohol restrictions for Aboriginal communities often implicitly suggests that Aboriginal people are somehow deficient in this area. So my question is this. Is alcohol just being used as a scapegoat with regards to Aboriginal disadvantage? At the very least, simply blaming alcohol consumption for all the problems facing the Aboriginal community is a little short-sighted.